Stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, everybody. One major item of discussion tonight, ordinance revision. Danielle, lead us out.
So I did add a sheet too. Everybody has that, right? Just when you did it. I changed my plan of attack a little bit. I was actually going to prepare an ordinance for you guys to review, and when I started to do that, I was having a little bit of challenge because when I was doing some research on this and looking at other communities and talking to people, there was just a lot of different options and different things that people do. So I kind of took a step back, and what I wanted to do is provide some of those options to you guys first before I try to incorporate it into the ordinance. So that I wasn't putting all of this stuff and maybe we don't necessarily need all of it. So we'll start with the first part. The meeting was initially set up to look at utility ordinance for payments specifically, and it kind of came up with some of the fee waiver requests that you guys have been seeing. And right now, the ordinance does not give staff any leeway to waive fees. I will tell you guys, if staff makes a mistake or does something, we correct it, but to me, that's not a fee waiver, that's us fixing our mistake, and that's the only time we do anything. Otherwise, it comes to you guys. So I looked at a bunch of other communities. I reached out to some people that I know to ask what they do, what's worked for them. It was very all over the place, what people do. So what I took notes, I got some ordinances and different things from people, and I tried to pull what I felt like we could implement or work with here. There were some things that we just don't have the staffing or the ability, so I didn't include those. But we can talk about any of these options. It's really up to you guys. I did ask Brandon to make sure that he was here because he does all of the billing most of the time. I mean, we help, but it's really his job to answer any specific questions about workload or any questions like that. But otherwise, I don't know how you guys if you want to go through each one individually. If you I included some payment things, some pay in full, and when this was first brought up initially, we had just talked about like giving staff the ability to do some adjustments within a certain amount. So that's the last option on this, but the ones before I think are potential, again, solutions or things that help our residents. So if you guys want to tell me if you have questions, if you completely hate it, we just will skip over it.
I liked, I wasn't following things at first, and as I read more, I understood. Personally, I like to go item by item to have that discussion.
Yeah, I'm good with that, definitely. So we'll just start right at the top. Payment in full program. So some communities they do this. This one I almost didn't include. But I wanted you guys to have kind of all the options. So some communities say if you come in and let's say you're past due and let's say you're turned off, you're past due and you've had $24 in late fees and $6 in interest, and you come in and pay, we'll take those penalties and interest off and you just pay your full balance. And it's kind of like, okay, you paid it in full, we won't charge the penalties and interest, we got our money. So that's the first option. I do want to, Brandon and I were kind of talking about this. If they do that and their water is off, that would not waive the turn on fee. It would only waive the penalties and interest. And Brandon, jump in at any time that you have comments, questions, concerns, because I don't want to forget them.
Can we just poo-poo on this one while we're at it? While we go talk about it?
Yeah, you guys, I mean, you guys tell me, love, hate, change, whatever you want to do.
Why would we not pay? I guess that incentivizes people to not pay their bill. Why would we nix the late fees? I'm sorry, if you pay late, you should pay the fee, pay the penalty. Otherwise, that sets a precedent to allow other people to continue saying, oh, I'm going to pay late or I'm not going to pay.
Mhm.
and expect that they're not gonna be, again. This is a business and the business has to make money. It makes it unfair to every other taxpayer, every other citizen that pays their water bill on time if we continue to allow people to not pay.
Yeah.
And get away with it. I mean, I'm sorry. Pay your bill on time, and I have no problem with working with people, but. I don't want to incentivize
This-
people to not.
Yeah, and that, I'm gonna guess that was probably one of the reasons you thought, I wonder if I should even include this, but I will because.
Yeah, I was trying to, if there was no like very specific reason that I tried to give you guys the options.
Right.
And Brandon and I kind of, honestly, what you just said, Mike, is almost word for word what Brandon said. He's like, no, it's their job, pay your bill. And then we did talk about like, if you guys want to consider this limiting it as well and saying, okay, we'll do it for you once, but that's it. Or because once we go further down, you'll see where there's some restrictions, like it does a 12-month look back.
Right.
But I don't necessarily disagree with you, but it is an option if you guys want to include it. If you all generally agree no, then I'm not gonna worry about incorporating that into the ordinance.
I concur with what Mike stated and what Brandon.
Before we move on. Penalties and interest, what interest rate do we charge?
What's our interest rate?
Okay, so there at the sheet, there's the penalty, that's 10% of your clean bill. So it's not gonna get your balance sheet going, and then anything is 30 days over past year, it's not gonna have 10% a month, so each 10% a year. And this year, then the only ones that get charged to 1.5% interest are the ones that will make the payment of community action. Because that shut everybody up in 1 month. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, how many different ways can you receive your billing statement?
How many different ways?
You can get your postcard in the mail,
Correct,
Email.
you can get emailed.
correct.
Is there a portal to log into?
Yes, if you go online to BSNA, you can pull up your account that way as well.
Do we
and
have,
see.
do we have any like text service? Messaging service? Are-
Text service, we do not.
So those are the only three.
No.
Correct, those 3 ways.
Okay, so that's actually there's the online web that if you come in here, they can pay over the phone, they can pay at distance, they pay.
He's saying how they receive the bill.
Oh, see if there's that you can pay because I'm sorry. So paper bill, email, and then
Okay, and so payment options are Dropbox,
Dropbox,
card,
Office, auto pay, online payment, call with a credit card. Yeah, I think I saw
so
that.
they
and.
Or the bank takes payments for us as well.
Blissfield State Bank.
State Bank.
Or automatic pay.
I said that one.
I didn't understand.
So it's 6 options.
Yeah, 6 different payment options.
Okay, so I just want to establish that when we're talking about late fees, we're talking about. All the waiving stuff for lack of receiving an invoice or lack of being able to pay. There's at least 3 options to receive an invoice, and there's at least 6 options to pay. So just please keep that in mind as we go through this discussion, that's all. Thank you for that sidebar.
Yes. Okay, so unless I hear anything otherwise, I'm gonna say we're not loving that one. Payment plan program, there is the following, which has a little bit more conditions there. So there's the residential and then there's commercial. Which are pretty similar, a little bit of difference, but I'm gonna kind of skim and summarize. Do you guys have one of these? Do you want one? I do have an extra on it. Oh, no, I don't. One. Do you guys have it in the agenda or no? Okay, that's it. So residential customers, this says that they would pay their current bill plus $100. And they would pay the current bill an additional $100 until it's paid in full. And that we would, by setting up the payment plan, we would waive that penalty. Or those penalties and interest unless they default, so then those would be reapplied back to the account. And then it does have some eligibility or some requirements that they can only do this if they default, they're not eligible for a payment plan again. Otherwise, if they don't default, it doesn't have a limit. You guys can add or change any of this, obviously. And then they would go, if they default, they go back into shut off status too. So while they're making that payment, their water is not getting shut off, but if they miss that, so then they would have to pay that turn on fee too. The commercial or industrial customer, it's very similar setup, other than instead of the additional $100, it takes out and would do 6 equal payments. So they can't have a payment plan for more than 6 months. So they pay current and then whatever that equal payment was. And then this one specifically does say, because these bills can be larger, that if it's the penalty is greater than $1,000, you guys would have to approve it. Anything under that. And again, if you guys like the payment plan option, we can make changes to this and do anything different as well. But I did provide it just as another option to maybe help people who are struggling but want to pay and or are trying to pay.
I just thought of something I wish I could can they, because they have to sign a payment agreement, so can if they obviously being shut off, but you could be out there in the house, can they still come in to agree that maybe not to start a bit?
So Brandon and I were talking about this too. If they do this option for tracking purposes and to make sure we know who's doing payments, I would establish a payment agreement that would list the eligibility and what happens if they default and that they would sign off on, so they can't say, oh, I didn't know, or if we're on the same page. And to answer your question, Brandon, that payment status is not in effect unless that form is filled out and completed. So if DPW's at their door turning them off, they're gonna have to pay that fee if they want to go into a payment plan, because they didn't come to us ahead. The payment plan is supposed to be that they're coming to us saying, hey, I'm really struggling to pay my bill, but I can do this payment plan. Will you work with me? It's not meant to be a way to get out of getting your water shut off or not paying penalties. It's to help the people that truly need it. Is how I would envision that.
DPW never collects any money, right? We never say.
No,
okay,
DPW never.
We say, we sorry, we can't do that, you have to work with us.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, I wanna make
Yes.
sure that was crystal clear.
Yes.
Could that resident, sorry,
No, go ahead.
could that resident request DPW to hang on just a second when they make a phone call and then pay over the phone with a credit card?
It's, I mean,
No.
they could, I guess, but this is, DPW's time is already stretched pretty thin, and I would be, I would not advocate for that at all. In fact, you would get some pushback from me because I don't think that's fair to our DPW staff, because they've got far too much to be waiting around for people that, I mean, they knew they were late, come in and make a payment plan. Especially if we choose to offer that, like, we'll put it out there that this is an option. There'll be a public hearing on it, there'll be an ordinance. So I would just hate to do that and kind of set a precedence, because then what takes us normally a day to do is now gonna take us 2 days.
Do you have an idea, Danielle, of the percentage, or Brandon, do you have an idea of the percentage of the residents that you think may utilize this program?
So I guess, well, we can see it as that they have to make a minimum $100 payment. I think that it's not gonna be as huge and overloaded of work. But as I do know that there are some residents that because how people are, they can't pay their bill by that date. They say, can I pay for it? Can I make the payment? Let's say the payment goes on Tuesday. Can I pay that Friday? So I know they will be able to take advantage of this policy. So because then because they're getting home off, they really will be. And I will say I am supported this policy, I do support this one. I think this was a good fit for us.
So you think you, as far as going back into the books, to look back over the 12-month period, how often has it been done, or how often they've been late, or looking back, is that going to be an issue? None of that's an issue.
Well, so
Why would anybody have a $700 bill? Because if we shut people off after 1 month, It should never be that, right?
I
It should never be
did, I tried to do like very round numbers that weren't, so that's why those are higher. They
Okay.
should not have that.
I mean,
That
because
was-
we're shutting people off after 1 month, right?
Yeah,
So
we're
you're
doing 1 month.
delinquent 1 month, so technically $100 on average should be the max for a residential customer, right?
Like, these aren't even equal to our fees. I was trying to, in the
Okay.
example, do like very even numbers to show kind of a clear picture of what it would look like. And I can change the example too, if you guys,
When do you become delinquent?
well, you're delinquent after not paying your bill. So your bill is due on the 25th of every month, or that's a Saturday, it'd be a Monday. And if you don't pay that, then we process all the payments, and on the 26th, you're charged a penalty. Just the penalty of the 10%. You then are required to pay that past due amount with the penalty before the 25th of the next month to avoid shut off.
Say it again, Daniel. Okay, so pay the month plus the penalty the following 25th.
Right, to avoid water shut off. If you fail to do that, so now you owe 2 months,
So 2 months should be.
you
the
get
max.
shut off, right?
Understand? Okay.
Plus 10% plus 3%,
1.5%.
or 1.5, sorry, 1.
Yes,
Where's the 1.5 coming from?
the 1.5 is charged after, so it's not charged that first month, it's
Gotcha.
charged after
First.
because it's the
And
injury.
it's only 1.5% on that first month, not the second month.
Right.
That's-
Gotcha, okay.
So 3, right, 3 or 10% and 1.5%.
So they would be shut off after that.
Correct.
So realistically, the resident is taking advantage of this payment plan, and the resident social security will have a payment date falls. The due date could be before that, they don't get their social security until Thursday. So
The-
unfortunately, once they.
The other thing I could see too is if there's a resident that fills their pool and they have a spike in their payment where normally they wouldn't have that, or their sump pump broke or their water heater or whatever, they had family visit and they used more water than normal. And maybe they budget, okay, my water bill is gonna be $150 a month, and then all of a sudden they have a spike and they're like, okay, I wanna pay, but I can't do the full thing. They may utilize that payment plan.
And we don't feel it's an unnecessary amount of accounts, so take advantage of it. So as not to burden the treasurer.
So
I'm sorry,
Kind of the same question I'm asking, is this something you think is doable, Brandon? Percentage of people that could utilize this, is it gonna burden the office staff? You,
I really don't, I don't.
that is, I think, why we set it at the current plus 100, because we want to work with people, but we don't want to make it so flexible and easy that everybody's doing it. So if they come in and they say, well, I current bill and $25, they do not qualify. We cannot set up a payment plan. And it's finding that happy medium, which I'm not saying we did perfectly, but that's kind of how we got to that $100 thought process, to make sure that it doesn't overburden us.
Can you give us an average, how many a month, just give us throw out a random number that you think are delinquent per month? We have how many accounts in the village?
How many delinquent accounts on an average month do we have?
Well, it's hard to give you a fair number because of that, there's a lot of community action, and then it takes a lot of time for the process, but I will say, I shut off, shut off accounts can range from 20 to 50. So,
That many.
yes.
On how many accounts?
And again,
How many total accounts are there approximately in the village of Brandon?
1,500 and 1546, I think it's 1546.
Yeah.
Are there quite a bit of community action? Is there real?
That's because we pushed it, because
I remember with the whole COVID thing, the community action.
The percentage is there, I mean, they have so much money, they thought that they don't use it all, they have to send it back to the state, so.
That only goes till September and we do not know what their fundage will be for next year.
September of this year.
Yeah,
They got a huge federal funding increase this last.
Okay, so it.
Because of
It could
those
change.
COVID relief
Yeah.
funds, so I would anticipate, and I think they are anticipating that their funding will drop back down significantly.
Okay.
Cause they got several million from COVID funding that they won't get again.
And then would you expect those people that are using that resource to become part of the 50 people that will be delinquent?
Is it repeat offenders generally every month?
Yeah,
Yes,
habitual.
yes.
And more tenant versus resident,
It's mostly tenants,
mostly tenant.
for that community action, because they. Do you know more about that?
I would say so.
Yeah, I would say it's about half. and half.
Yeah.
Okay,
That are shut off,
Is that?
every month? Or
Yeah, they, I would say,
homeowners or rent.
I'm trying to ask you a question a different way. Mostly homeowners, they get shut off, but it's mostly because they, that they didn't do it. It's not because they didn't have the money. Should that they forgot. Tenants are because they don't have the money.
that's what they.
I
claim.
don't know about that.
yeah, but it's what, I do agree with Brandon, that that's what they say.
versus-
But that is what they say versus what's reality.
And that goes back to how many ways could we let them know, and how many ways do they have to pay, so it kind of defeats their argument that
Oh,
it's,
totally
it's not
defeats our argument,
there,
yeah,
it's not available.
the 20.
Yeah, just to piggyback on Mike's point, do we have a caveat that say they have to send out by email? Like, so if they say they're not receiving their postcard, then.
Oh, yeah, that is automatically, we ask. At least I know I do. So
Yes.
if they tell me they don't receive their bill, I double check, to make sure their address is in there correctly. And then I double check to make sure that their email is in there, and I know Stacy's doing that, and I'm pretty sure Brandon is, but. And then we automatically will put that in there if they will give it to us and explain to them that they still will receive the postcard. And also get an email.
Okay.
And they get the email on the first when Brandon sends the bills out, and then their postcards come after that.
Do we know how many people are signed up for auto pay?
I don't know how many people are signed up for auto.
I think it's over 300 something. So I think that's how they get shut, I think it's 340.
And we have about 480 emails right now, right?
Okay,
And then-
that.
No, he did ask auto pay, I just was trying to include emails too.
Yeah, because we've been pushing it, I mean, we've really been pushing the email for last year, so at the beginning, I would say we didn't need to stay emails in last year.
Right, I thought it was fair for musician.
I think it's 600 $7. No,
And we prepaid, right, so if I sign up for water, if I build a house or I move here, I pay for the first 2 months, right, so we're a month. In arrears, is that how that works, or?
We're
6
six-
months behind, or 6 weeks.
Or 6 week, okay, yeah.
6 weeks ahead or 6 weeks?
Behind.
That's my judgment, yeah.
we made on the 15th to the 15th. So June 15th to July 15th, we're in August first.
And a lot of the problems are these people are just that, like for social security, whatever, they just can't pay at that time because they get their paycheck at a week later or whatever. I mean, what if we set it up to where, because if you close your account, you generally get a credit, correct? No, we don't.
No, so if I come close today, I'll actually have another bill because we're 6 weeks
Okay,
back.
that's right. I'm just wondering if there's a way like to get them paid ahead. To where they're that month
So they're
ahead,
not-
so that we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul, because it's always. I'm just as close, but I need another week, you know what I mean? So is there a way to set it up so that it,
Second, okay, I just wanted to say, I want to use, okay. What we could do, but I don't know, do you have a worded in the ordinance, what I do, I have to sit, I have to want the, maybe first, and the 21st, 22nd of tomorrow. To turn it over to the bank, so they have time to come under everybody's account. So what we could do is, I still run that, and what happens is when I do number 21st, 22nd, it automatically pushes the payment to the Christian account already. So what I can do is change the settlement date, it should be after the due date, but the payment will still be considered on time. That's an option.
But that's just for auto pay though, that's not gonna help.
Huh?
That's just for auto pay people, that's not gonna help in general.
No, Mike's talking about
Yeah,
taking.
so the only way you
Constant.
could do that, Mike, is you'd have to estimate the bill, and then if the usage were higher or lower, they'd either have, if it was lower, they'd have a larger credit. If it was higher, they would still have money due. So, and that would be, especially with the way we read meters right now, it would, I don't know. I'm trying to think like how logically or actually doing that, how we would make that work too.
You'd have to take a flat fee of say $300 and put it into an escrow account. And have an agreement as to a deposit similar to a security deposit on any lease that you sign. And then at some point. When after the last billing, when the shut off, it would be adjusted.
Right.
And then a credit would be issued.
Yeah, and we do take deposit for those tenants, but we don't for, if you buy a house, we don't take a deposit.
Yeah.
Maybe in theory that works, but maybe they just let it happen. They say, oh, I can't, well, like, I have a month, and then they just get right back to the same routine, you know what I mean? So really, it buys them just 1 month, and then, I don't know if it
1 or 2 months.
works out okay, but not in really. I feel for people, I really do, but I thought we were gonna be talking about like if somebody's water, you know, rather than all these accounts coming to us and having to address these accounts. I thought
And
that's what we're
those
talking
are
about.
next
Okay,
too,
I just-
yeah. Just when I was
I'm
doing
sorry
all,
about fees, I mean, it is what it is, but
when I was doing all the research for it, these other things came up, so I'm like, oh, I'm gonna include these while we're having the conversation. And
because all
And
this
I
stuff
will tell
costs us
staff
money, it costs.
it
you
is
guys
more time
costs
to
you-
do,
Yep.
yeah, we have to create a form, we have to track it. I'm by no means are we saying, oh, we for sure should do this, but it is an option, it is another way to help people, and it does, like, if they come to us, Mike, and say, well, I've got this high bill this month, instead of us saying, well, go, you can take it to council to request a waiver, we say, well, we've got this payment option, and that's why it was included. But ultimately, it's up to you guys, and keep in mind, we can, if you're like, okay, we kind of like the payment idea, but let's change this, we can do that as well. We can also, and we'll go to the next 2 items, which are more what you said, Mike, look at these, and we can say, let's put any of these into the ordinance, and then in a year, let's see what the impact of reflect back and say, has this solved a lot of our issues? Or do we still need to consider this payment plan? Because the next section, I'll just kind of jump forward, kind of fits here. Utility repair program. So this is saying under this program that they can get us the sewer portion of their bill waived if they have if it didn't go into the sewer system and they had some kind of repair. And this is something we've seen a lot of, and another community that does this exact thing. Where, for example, you guys recently have had, I want to say 3 of the water ran sump pumps that ran, and you guys credited back the sewer only portion to the resident, and they still had to pay the water. If this were to go in the ordinance, that wouldn't have to come to you. We could do that, but this does have limitations as well. So the customer would have to prove that they repaired the item, so it doesn't continue. Their credit would be based on the last 12 months, which is exactly how I've been presenting it to you guys that you've approved. And then it does say that that there's a cap on it, and that anything over the $300 would require 2 employees to review and approve, and anything over 1,000 would require you to approve. And then it does say, and the penalties would only be waived because of the time that it would take us to do that. If somebody comes in on the due date, the 25th, and they bring this to our attention, we may not necessarily be able to determine that same day what the fee is. So that would be the only time we waive the penalty, is if because of staffing reasons, that time was expended past the due date, otherwise we would not waive the penalty.
Can I say something? So it's just because I had this question asked this week. We had someone that filled their pool and that's not going into the sewer, so they had called and questioned about that. So I mean, this does specifically repair, but I know people are gonna ask about that.
Or just do it and say, well, Mike somehow ran it.
And we just have to,
So we need that automated system. I mean, that'll help with a lot of this, but
So they have to prove that they had the damage or repaired it. In everything that I found, nobody waives for pools. One community used to, and they just last year got rid of the program completely. They did no adjustments for pools. Certainly, again, any of this is up to you guys that you want to change, add. I mean, you guys set the ordinance and we'll enforce and follow it.
I don't like the pool portion. I think that's challenged. There are companies out there that haul. You know, and do that for.
Fill it
Yeah.
by your own.
Well, and so Brandon and I did talk about this, and a couple of things we came up with is how do we verify or regulate that? So Lisa comes to me and says, give me a credit for my pool, which holds 10,000 gallons. How do I know that it's 10,000 gallons?
Right.
And is it on our system? Because I'm gonna tell you it's 10,000, even if it's only 5,000. I mean, I probably wouldn't, but somebody might. And I'm not gonna, I go look at your pool all day long and be like, yeah, that's more than 10 gallons, but I don't know how many are in there.
Okay, what's your last one?
Okay, last one is just a straight billing adjustment. So this is saying, this is a program where what I think of is the most recent one that you didn't get it in the mail, whatever issue. Is that if there's a unique situation that's no fault of theirs or the village, that we can give them a one-time waiver of the penalty only fee. No, they're not getting a waiver of their bill, just the penalty. And that staff, if we get information to feel that we can approve that, they cannot have been delinquent in the past 12 months. So if they're routinely not paying their bill, they're not eligible. They've had no other waiver in the last 12 months either. So let's say I grant one next month, they're not eligible for another year, so that they're not coming in every month like, oh, I just didn't get my bill. The customer has to sign up for email to receive their bills electronically, and anything in excess of $50 would come to you guys still.
So this is similar to the issue we had last year.
Where it was a late fee and again, those are the criteria. So if they don't meet these criteria, staff does not have the authority to approve it.
And the $50, you like that number that you had there?
Yeah, I can't imagine, since I've been here, the only time that it's been greater than $50 was the issue with the school. And the school has since signed up for their email, and it was the way their meetings fall, and they have to get approval for bills. So theirs work was greater than that, but other than that, I don't think there's any that I racked my brain, there was none that I could think of, so I'm comfortable with that.
How do you flag it then in the system?
So our program lets us put comments and flags both. So we would put a comment in the account that a waiver was authorized in whatever amount on this date. So then anytime any of us access that account, we can see that.
And do accounts stay with the address or stay with customer name or the number, I guess?
They would stay with customer name. So if you pull up 103 North Lane, it'll pull all the past customers on that account, and you'd have to
You
pull
just search for that.
yes.
That's cut and dry.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Bam.
Yeah, actually, the last two are basically what we dealt with. as far as the water issue goes, excuse me. So yeah, that utility repair program and then billing adjustments is sort of what I had in mind before I even started going through this stuff.
Brandon's got comments.
Okay, I talked to Daniel about this maybe, and we went back and forth on this, and maybe you guys can think of a better way. You know, once a year, in Shophouse, we are bills to read the penalty if they sign off for email bills. So I said to Daniel, can you put a second line in there, you will read the penalty for the second time if they sign up for auto pay. And it never be pushed over. So Daniel brought up a point, but that's why I'm looking at you, see if you can find something better. Well, what if that person signs up for auto pay to get the second penalty removed, and then next week they drop it? They drop the
What
cancel.
what happens with auto pay if they don't have the funds
Yeah,
available?
that's what I was just gonna add, right?
It gets kicked back and they're charged, then it's added back, they go into that delinquent status and they're charged an NSF fee. Which, and it has happened. I wouldn't say it happens a ton, but it
That
has
charge like
happened.
the, whatever your raise from $30 to $40, that like the NSF is the same with the check, you know, so
Yes.
the online kickback, you're considering that because the bank's gonna bill us that as a.
Correct, yeah, we still get
Yeah,
charged that
auto pay.
NSF fee on an auto pay versus if a check bounces, a physical check.
And credit card expires on auto pay. I mean, that's happened to me with Amazon.
So our auto pay is set up by your bank account.
Okay.
Not a credit or debit card, so they have to enter their routing number in their account and then sign off on that.
But people change banks and stuff too and forget, you know, I get it, yeah, it happens, but.
And that's why I think the billing adjustment would be a one-time, hey, I moved banks, I didn't update the account. You know,
I'd say 1 year.
yeah, can you waive the fee? They'll probably have to pay the set fee, but obviously everything else we could cover and then they could get back right back on auto pay.
Yeah, and I like when Brandon brought this up, I had actually put it in here and then removed it. Because I had the same thought as him, but I did worry about. They just go off of it or it creating more problems, so that's why I reverted back to the email only, because it's just, again, that extra layer of. You did get it, you knew it was coming every month.
Well, based upon the past, I don't know how many times people have come in because of a water issue, the utility repair program and the billing adjustment program, if we can mesh those two, I think we would solve. I think 99% of the issues we're gonna have, with the exception of the antique mall. I think that would have covered everything else, including the Pearl Street mystery. So,
I think as long as you guys keep your judgment, I think we should trust our staff, okay, you're sorry you changed your bank, okay, you missed payment once, okay, then you change your bank or whatever, I mean. I would hope we could trust our staff, not to nix a very small, yeah, exactly, a small fee on something like that, I don't have a problem, but I don't think that should come to us every month, that's unnecessary.
I mean, it would simplify our lives too, because when it comes to you, I have to prepare the information to come to council, I have to look back at their account.
I concur, meshing them together and
Okay. Rather than meshing them, would you guys be opposed to me putting them in the ordinance as two separate programs?
oh yeah,
No,
Okay, I just want to make sure you're good with that. Okay.
thanks for the other information, Danielle. But
It's regarding the fee structure, not to change it out too bad, but we used to rent, I guess, hydrants back in the day. And we had a rental fee, are we still doing that? We still have people ask for that?
We have not since I've been here. I do know that we have a hydrant meter. The DPW has, which I'm assuming is how we've done that in the past, is meter that hydrant so they can use it.
when would that be for?
We haven't done it for quite a long time.
Yeah.
I mean,
So I know we did that in the previous city I worked for, and a lot of times it would be for construction projects that they maybe needed additional water, so they would hook up to the hydrants they didn't have a business or house to hook up to. But yeah, we've not had the need since I've
The
been here.
DPW had said, mentioned to me also that some of the hydrants are kind of fragile and
That's my
the
fear.
more
too.
on and off with those, the more risk of them breaking.
Right, and some of them have to be drained, you know, in the winter, and I guess, the only reason I saw it is because I looked at magically for some reason the old fee schedule on there, but so I just wasn't sure if it was something that we continue to
They
need.
said that to me recently.
Okay.
We do have those on capital improvement plan, right?
Hydrants?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
Just to jog everyone's memory, they're on there. There's like
It's not even the old ones, so it's some of
the newer ones,
it's just, yeah,
It's done.
we've had issues with the fire department.
they don't make them like
No.
they used to.
No, James is saying in the capital improvement.
No, I mean, on the fee schedule.
No, it's not.
Okay, gotcha, okay. Beautiful.
Alrighty, next section of tonight is the REUs or residential equivalent unit, which is on page 6 of the agenda. And there's 4 different examples. These, again, I actually, you guys are gonna have to trust my memory here. I did this back at the end of last year, and this was presented in November of 22. I don't remember everybody that I reached out to, but I do remember researching this and talking to communities to see what they do. I had talked to Michigan Rural Water, who provided one of the examples. I don't recall which one, but these are some of the different things that communities have for their units. So I included this because it did come up and I thought it kind of tied in with the utility discussion. And added this and the next item to the agenda for you guys. But I don't know. You guys, what you want to consider, look at, talk about. I will answer questions. I will give you some time to digest that for a minute if you need it.
I'm gonna turn it over to Mike. Well,
Okay. I never really would have thought about it until I had owned a building which had different various uses and whatnot and others. And then looking back, you know, with Matt after had issues, you know, back when he spoke with Joe in the past, things like that. And then the more I looked into, the more I've just researched the water bills. You know, say you've got an apartment complex out at like Riverview, where you have 8 units in a one building, and it's fed by a certain size line versus another apartment maybe next door that has individual units fed by a 5/8 or a 3/4 inch line. So, you know, I guess I want to be fair and consistent across the board. So the way that I look at it is by us determining meter size. Again, we only maintain up to the curb box. We maintain the shut off and that's it. And everything else is a property owner's issue. So I don't really want to get into the business of having to enter people's houses at different times or people having to come in or call and say, well, I used to do this with my business, now I do this or that. It just makes it dirty and it's more work for these guys. So the way that I always looked at it was go back to the building code and the plumbing codes, which are set by the state. And those are what dictate how many units can be fed by a certain size water line. So say, that's all in Michigan plumbing and building code. So say I built an apartment complex out, offered to you another one. And I built 6 units in it. I would by state statute, by plumbing code, by building code, have to provide at least a 1.5 inch line to feed those 6 units. Or provide individual, you know, 3/4 inch lines to each individual apartment. So again, it's not only, I guess, the existing, but how do we clean it up for the future when we actually do grow and we do maybe get more complexes, more multifamily, that sort of thing. So is there a utility room with a meter? Is there a utility room, you know, with one large line and then it comes off and it breaks off to a manifold where each individual unit has its own meter? Or do we just relay it back to the landlord to say, okay, you have this size line that comes in at your meter. You just say, okay, you've got 6 units and you make your tenants pay it. So there's different ways around it. And much like John Holland always said, the larger users should bear more of the fee. So the way that I look at it is, okay, we consider a residential unit, the 3/4 or the 5/8 line. But then if you have an apartment complex, you know, you have that quote, larger line that has to feed those, so say a 1.5-inch line can dictate anything above 6 units. So you make that 1.5-inch fee 6 times greater than what the RU of a one. I guess a one residential or one RU would be. Does that make sense?
Yes. So I did, because you had mentioned this before, Mike, your kind of reasoning that you just explained. So I do want to share, I did a little bit of digging and research on this. Because a lot of communities charge the per unit because of their fees. So the extra paper that I gave you on the right-hand side looks at your units. So in the village, we have 201 units that are not, that would be like additional within another property. So if you got rid of the units, you would eliminate 201 base fees. So I put the current, and when I say current rate, that's good. This, I'm looking at the rates that we adopted for October 1. It's
The new rate, the next year.
right, the next year rate. So monthly and annual, that's the reduction in revenues that we would see. So that's the first part. Second part, when Mike was explaining the plumbing thing, I was a little bit confused by this. So I went and pulled plumbing code. I tried to call Don today. He was not available, but I have a really good friend who's actually a building official. So I called him and he answered too, because I wanted to make sure. So plumbing code does not specify the size of the line that's required. What plumbing code specifies is the required flow rate and flow pressure. So when I talked to him, he said, somebody could come in and let's say that they wanted to build an apartment complex with 80 units. Those 80 units could be fed by a 2-inch line. In fact, more likely than not, it would never have larger than a 2-inch line unless it was a line for fire suppression. And that goes back to plumbing code. So that's why a lot of communities charge that base or that RU per unit, because if they're paying the 2-inch fee, it's not the equivalent of a 5/8
Because it's based on
meter.
the toilet or, you know, is, I think, one, right, and then, you know, like
Yeah,
a
so I did,
shower or.
yeah, I
a
got
seat
the
is
book,
one.
so it counts
So,
like, yeah, your toilet, your bathtub. Or you can do a combination fixture, it does include if there's a dishwasher that increases it, but it's pretty minimal. Flow rates and pressures, so for a dishwasher, it requires a flow rate of 2 and a pressure of 8. We do have pretty good pressures in Blissfield. Just recently, because, I mean, really, we had the water break because our pressure spiked, so. Pressure has not been an issue here, but it does, so sink again, 1 flow rate, 8 pressure. So a lot of times, like 2-inch would be the maximum, so how would, and I'm not saying what Mike is telling you is wrong, but what we would have to figure out is how do you adjust that 2-inch rate to make up for this difference in RUs that's fair to what those users would have. And potentially all of our unit, and we don't have an 80 apartment complex right now. What's our largest? It's gotta be,
I think it's 1.5 inches.
and that's Joy Street, right?
That's the famous NSU.
Everything else can run on a 3/4 inch meter, which is our norm. So that 8-unit apartment complex can run on a 3/4 inch meter and would pay the 104.22 plus usage, which is the same that I pay at my house.
Well, building code says up to 6.
And then.
Plumbing building is different, sorry, yeah, plumbing is by whatever that unit that you said. Building is by meter size or inch water line size. So I get, yeah, it's like supplementing, you know, you don't want to take a 6-unit complex and give them only 1 RU, because then that puts all the burden on all the other residents, the citizens that pay their normal RU.
For both water and sewer.
Right. But again, you know, much like where we had argued in the past where Matt's uses had changed or my use had changed, you know, I had rented 3 units at one point and then it went back to having 2 units. So again, but we had to kind of argue that out of, well, they're giving the person the second floor, but Brandon wanted to charge me 3 units because it in the past was 3 units. So again, either we need to be open to say, okay, businesses change and units change and things like that inside these buildings. Or we need to come up with a definitive idea and say, okay, we only maintain up to the meter and everything else is the customer's issue.
Are you talking about the way they check about regrading and equipment that it went down?
Yeah,
Well, that was because that one of the units was being used as a residential unit that wasn't supposed to be as used as residential. So that's where the reduction came from, because then it became part of the storefront.
where's that at?
The apartment downstairs, that should not be part of the apartment downstairs. So that became part of the storefront, so that allowed for the unit reduction. So that's how that happened, but I want to put something else on the general question. So if you adjust a shooting stranger to make up the difference for all these other ones, who's to say that apartment complex is he gonna drop into a bad yes?
He can't by building code, he can't.
And they,
I'd have to go look at building code because plumbing code says it's by flow and rate. It doesn't specify the size. I mean, I know a little bit about building code, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
I believe when I looked up Michigan building code, one
I can
normal size line,
grab the book.
need up to 6
quick.
quote units. And again, it's determining what is in there. Because like, you know, we go back to thinking about Matt's businesses in his building, you know, is it fair to him to pay 3 RUs when he literally does just have maybe 1 or 2 bathrooms in that entire complex? You know what I mean? And it's technically 3 or 4 quote buildings lined up together, but he's, you know what I'm saying? So again, I'm just trying to break it down evenly and fairly, I guess, across the board.
Yeah, I think, well, in example 1, I think. It would sort of make sense for Matt, or in his case, if he's got a separate tax license. And he's got, say, 3 or 4 of those storefronts. But they'd all have to be run off 1 single meter. So if he could do that, then I'd be in favor of sort of example 1, living unit means a single family unit, and a business unit would be single tax ID, whether or not you take that tax ID and let's say like B-Town, for example. Is Coney and B-Town 1 single tax ID? And therefore, can they go to 1 meter in that building? I wouldn't see a problem with that. And in Matt's case, if he could run the lines past the meter on 1 single tax ID, then I'm fine with that as well. But if he's got secondary tax ID for the restaurant, it's got to be its own unit. Now, if even if he's leasing it out, it would still have to, like, her tax ID, I would have to supersede his, if that makes sense. Now, if he's got I'm just trying to think of ways around it. You could have a real estate investment company with 1 tax ID, and you could have multiple units.
Right.
But
Right.
so, you know, he could have 8 storefronts under 1 tax ID, but if he was to lease out the restaurant portion to a second tax ID, it has to be a standalone.
And I think that would clean it up in the future, you know, say an apartment complex came in and built. You know, how do we want to rate it? How do we want to meter it? Do we just have 1 meter and then we consider everything else up again beyond that is, you know, is 1 RU? Or does each individual unit have its own cold water line on a manifold? I guess. You know,
To me,
that's
that-
beyond me, it's stuff that I
To me, it
have
just,
never done, so.
example 4 is where I'm just looking at me. You got one family, here's your one unit, you got 2 family, it's 2 units, it's triplex apartments, 1 unit per living unit, I guess maybe that's, to me, that seems very simple.
Well, yeah, that's what's echoed in example 1.
Right, but then it has the business portion down there as well,
Right.
so,
Yeah,
Well, but
I don't like
so-
that because then you're defining it based on square footage, you're based on usage, things like that. It's a little bit more definitive rather than arbitrary.
to me, it's clear, it's, 4 is clear.
Right.
To me, it's,
Well, I don't think it is. Look at what's going on
You don't
right
think so?
now with the expansion of that coffee shop at Brewery. They're opening up where Blooms used to reside. So are they a second? They're gonna add an additional 1,000 square feet. Are they gonna need a second meter? Or is it under one tax ID number? And I mean,
One
like,
unit
so I'll
per
give you
each
another
1,000 square
example. Mr. Eric Slusher, Linda. So he put a bathroom in for his clients,
right,
and then eventually pulled it because he didn't wanna have to pay a second fee.
I don't think did he end up pulling it then, Danielle?
He did.
He did,
Yeah, he
for the
did.
longest while, he did
He-
not.
Yeah, he did right there towards the end.
I didn't realize that, okay, thank you.
But it was a very low use,
Oh, certainly,
but
yes,
if you know as a business operator that if you have a standalone tax ID number, which he did for his flooring company, then he'd have to have his own meter and pay the fees associated with it.
so you're saying for like the meat portion of, they were looking for the tax ID number. Adding that in there, maybe that would.
Yeah, so in example 1, where you have that separation as,
Yeah, I do think 1 is also, for what it's worth, my 2 cents, I guess, 1 makes the most sense. However, keep in mind that it wouldn't change an apartment that has 8 units would pay 8 RDUs. As they do now under number 1. With the business portion, I do think that it clears things up. I also think we need to keep in mind that Matt's property is not the normal, that is a very unique situation, and that's not normally what you see. In a downtown, you would typically see your downstairs main floor commercial space and then residential upstairs. That is clearly two different units.
Yeah.
Where he kind of owns that whole, or not kind of, he does, owns that whole corner that wraps around with multiple businesses. I think example 1 would clear that up. If you have separate tax IDs with these facilities, if you do, you're paying a unit for each of them.
I'm
And
if it's all one. paying without 1 meter.
But when you talk tax IDs, and we can count tax IDs and then under something else, you know, that are used in this business.
No, that's.
No, because their business is,
With it,
the business is to rent space for those people. So it's not, each of those individual people don't have a say in the building or property. It's like a consignment, they rent that space, like we wouldn't charge Carla's, each of her vendors because they use her one building. And that's how I would, I guess,
Yeah, that's the
that's how I.
I see what you're saying now, Jason, with the separate tax license pay, that section of it.
Yeah, so that's the important.
No,
piece.
I
Yeah,
bam with 4. I'm for number 1.
yeah.
And then everybody calls
So it doesn't like allow,
I like that.
like the Eric Slusher example. It's unfortunate that, he's got a low use powder room for his clients, but if you know as a business owner or operator that you have to have your own account, then like it's upfront,
Mhm.
it's stated policy, so it's, part of your monthly costs of doing business.
So essentially, whatever the license is, if you have a license. Understand?
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
tax.
But I don't think that solves I think that clears up, and now if we were to adopt that in our ordinance. For anything in the future, I don't think it addresses Mike's. Concern, or I don't know if I can call it a concern, his thoughts on eliminating the REUs completely.
No, not completely. I just want to set it, I guess, so it's not arbitrary.
Okay.
Because if you look at this is from our zone, or from our ordinance. Water supply and sewage disposal system, it's ordinance 150s. So if we go to number 150.011, that says we may not provide free service to anybody. No free service shall be furnished by said system, any person, firm, corporation, public, private, or any public agency instrumentally. That goes back to my issue with the school and the water line, the water for the field. Are we doing something that we shouldn't be doing? Again, it was sort of a tit for tat regarding putting the tennis courts out there. But again, is that something that we should run past legal to make sure that we're valid on that? The next one, then talking about these RUs and lines, whatnot. How they go. All right, so water meters, use of revenues, 150.12.12a. So all new rehabilitated or converted residential structures shall have a water meter of the following size: 1 to 3 dwelling units get a 5/8 or a 3/4 inch water meter, 4 to 7 dwelling units a 1 inch water meter, 8 to 15 dwelling units a 1.5 inch water meter, 16 to 31 or 2 inch. So again, we sort of talk out of both ends regarding our rate structure versus what our building structure is. Does that make sense? So we're saying that we can feed Riverview Apartments off of 1.5 inch meter, yet we're sort of double dipping each unit for that 1.5 for that REU. Does that make sense? I guess that's kind of my, is that something that generally happens, or are we double dipping, or, you know,
Yeah, I don't
want to be confused.
I don't think we're double dipping in that regard. If we define a living unit as a space or ordinarily occupied by a single family.
Right.
But if you look above that, under the fee, okay. I feel like that part just needs to be removed, Mike,
What's that?
because if you look, the part you just read, if you look up above in the fees
Stop
under.
right there for just a second, I want to catch up with you guys. Where are you on the ordinances?
No, so we're in the 150s in the ordinances.
Okay.
It's the.
So he just read 150.012A, water meters use of revenues. But if you go back up to. You gotta get there, hold on. One water rates up above under 150.010. It says that residents be monthly charged. I'm trying to get to the part of it. It says water bill usage is billed shall be assessed if the residence, apartment, business, or rental unit connected to the meter has its own separate individual 5/8 water. So this, I'm trying to find exactly where it was, but it says that the additional fee is a 5/8 fee. So if they have a 2-inch meter going to their apartments, we don't charge each apartment a 2-inch availability fee, we charge them the 5/8 fee.
So yeah, you got, so for those water meters which provide water service to more than one residence, apartment, business, or rental unit, the monthly charges assessed to the water meter, blah, blah, blah. Business,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it shall be billed or assessed as each residence, apartment, business, or rental unit connected to the water meter has its own separate individual
5/8, okay, yeah, that's what I knew it
So
was.
it's literally one REU.
Right, so they can have a 2-inch meter now, but we're only billing those units a 5/8 base fee and the usage for the 2-inch meter.
But then it
We're
goes
not
back to-
billing the 2-inch.
So is that because if you have an 8-unit building, you don't want 8 lines coming off the water main? You
Correct,
want one coming up to the utility room and then branching out to tape.
correct.
So we're gonna define the 8. And leave the building code alone. Is that?
That's what I think we should do, yes.
Yeah,
But then we have to be cognizant that usages change. And again, I had myself in that building. I had Heather's business and I had the karate upstairs. or sorry, not Heather's business, Nanette's business. And when the karate moved out, I said, Nanette, okay, I don't need this. They wanted more storage because they were packing boxes so full. I said, okay, you guys can go rent the upstairs, which changed the rental agreement. Okay, so that became still 2 units. But I had to argue with Brandon that because they were renting the top and the bottom, he said, well, it's got a bathroom upstairs. So he still wanted to charge me 3 units. Again, that's my issue is usages change, leases change, properties change. So again, we either need to, I don't want to be in there inspecting, I don't want to send somebody
But
out there.
then number
So-
one, I would not have to inspect because you would come in here and you would tell Brandon or I or whoever
That would be-
that the lease changed and I have one business renting out these 2 spaces under,
I did
and,
that.
and I'm gonna pick on number 1 because it's my favorite as well, but it says, so it's ownership or IRS tax ID, so 1 business 2, so you have 2. I don't have to go inspect it under that definition, you just have to provide me that and then we change it.
That would be the ownership onto the business.
Right.
owner, which
So,
it
cause
should
he
be.
would just come show me, okay, the same owner is using the upstairs and downstairs, and then I still have myself, or I don't remember everybody said, sorry.
But it's up to the building owner to take that.
To provide
Yes,
that.
yeah,
provide that
yeah, the
information.
building owner would have to
Yeah.
do that, because
Right.
we don't have.
Or the
time
leasing.
to-
And then if
Yes.
things really change.
Either, or the leasing, I agree,
Then-
but somebody,
yeah.
not us.
And my point is then if say Heather were to do that with her business and say, let's start pulling permits and she wants to put 3 or 4 apartments upstairs. Then that falls back on her pulling the proper permitting, since having, the inspections go through during the construction phase or whatnot. And we can change it then, we can regulate it then. I don't want to send Brandon or Daniel or anybody every couple months into these different units say, oh, well, this changed things like that. Again, let's take people for their word. Let's, you know what I mean?
Well,
I
then
just
you
wanna
have
be
that
fair.
living unit, it's a single family unit, so I think we're covering both. Both.
Yeah,
And if we don't like it, let's revisit it. I hate to say it, but after all this, a good discussion, but let's write it into the ordinance and see how it applies, and if it goes well, great, and if not.
did everybody else generally like example 1? I know James and I kind of said that, but.
It makes it
It's
hard
the
with
simplest.
duplexes too, these private duplexes where people split, say, think of 223, these sort of, they were built as a single residential house, and then sooner or somebody buys them up, Mr. Slumlord or whoever does it, and they're, whether there's 2 units, 3 units, we don't really know. You know what I mean? But I don't expect us to be sending our staff in there. I think that just, leads us into further slippery slopes of
Well, wouldn't
what
it-
next do they see?
If a house goes ahead and they become 2 units, would they have to have some plumbing inspector to do that? And with the inspection with the plumber, wouldn't we?
Well, they should definitely would need, yeah, they definitely should
Yeah.
have some permits,
There would be-
because there should be
A
fire
lot of stuff's
separation.
just-
there should
Now,
be-
good point, good, I see what you're saying.
And actually, again, we're not reinventing the wheel. I just want to be fair across.
There's usually a separate mailing address too, to those type of units that change to that.
Yeah,
Don't get the post office involved.
No, well, the address is not dictated by the post office, it's dictated by the utility. Which is usually consumer power or. DTE energy or might be electric or gas.
But also, again, I have a big old farmhouse on the corner of Shearing Depot. Say if I took my upstairs and made that an apartment and I live downstairs, I could still feed that number of units based on the water pressure, based on the RE or what are those called in the plumbing?
Yeah, you do perfectly.
You know what I'm saying? So nobody would ever know. And that's kind of the fairness aspect of it is
They wouldn't know, but it would be fair.
by plumbing, I still have plenty of water pressure to feed both of those units. Because I've got a 5/8 inch line coming to the house. So, again,
Yeah, I
this
don't wanna-
happens everywhere else in this entire country, so there's gotta be an easier way to figure out what's an easy.
You're
way.
right, we can't be policing it, but we can
Right.
sort of govern it. Hopefully our governance works.
So if we were to adopt number 1, how would that affect our REU units? Would that have a big effect on those?
Most of our REUs are residential. Since I've been here, I've done 3 inspections, Matt, 3 bridges and slusher and commercial. And outside of that, we've not had really any issues. And the residential would fall under that first part.
Would you have a question?
Yeah, Barb's got the same issue, you know, Barb in her building. You got your store downstairs, you got Brandy, and you got 2 apartments in the back or 3, 2 apartments? 2, so that should be 4. Just remember that's 4 RUs. That Barb's probably should be getting 4 fees for, you know, whatever water bills being sent to that address.
That Barb is getting 4 initial fees.
Right,
I pay for, well, I don't pay for, I pay 2.
and you just probably pass it on to your tenant.
But I put those apartments in. And by code, they have to have their own meter. So if you had a house and put an apartment in upstairs, by code, it should have its own meter. And if it doesn't, and you did the work and didn't get a permit, it's illegal.
But
So is that
building
illegal?
code tells me that I can have how many units fed from my water line. So
But for your
again,
water line,
it conflicts.
for your water line, but don't you have to? I mean, if you put the apartment in legally, you would have to get everything inspected.
Yeah, you almost want to have that building code say, instead of units, meters. Right, like a 3/4 or 5/8 line could feed 4 metered.
I don't think we should. We've adopted code. So we've adopted Michigan building code, we've adopted plumbing code. And that says what is required, but it does not say the meter size that's required or the line. It says the pressure and the flow rate. So if you meet those, it doesn't matter what size, you just have to meet those requirements.
Is that our ordinance that's off then? Because our ordinance.
That's what,
is-
yes, that's what I'm
that's-
saying. I think this 150-0112A, I think that needs to be
Yes.
repealed. Because that does
That is
not
what
line
conflicts
up
then
with building code at all. I'm not even, to be
I
honest,
wasn't sure if we
I've
copied
not
that,
seen
yes,
that.
from Michigan plumbing versus Michigan building code. That was my concern.
I see what you're
Is
saying.
we're conflicting in our.
Is this Blissfield or the states?
Yes.
yeah, that is
Okay.
Blissfield, because I just
So
pulled the
We're
building
looking at repealing
150-012A.
and adding definition for a unit.
The example A,
Example 1, yep, and
or
then
1.
also adopting the new. What do you want to call it? Billing option,
Yeah, the billing adjustments and utility repair.
option,
Is there anything that falls under zoning? Is there any issues there with the zoning issue?
I mean, like if Mike wants to put an apartment with zoning or, sorry to pick on you, Mike, but you
No,
use that
if you
example.
took an existing house, I'm just using that as an example because there are some houses here in Blissfield that either were a 2, like a duplex, and are now 1, or have gone the other way and they've gone to 2.
Yeah, so potentially Blissfield does have single family residential zones that would not allow for multi-unit duplex or.
That's considered a multi-unit, correct?
Yes, it would be. So anything that's in R1, I'd have to double check on R2. So in order to do that, they'd have to be located in mixed use multifamily
Well, duplexes are allowed,
in R1.
right? I believe. Or for 2 at least.
I think they're in R2. I don't know that, but I can tell you.
And okay, I guess when we're talking about this, if we like example 1. So say Forky's expands to that next building, they're technically gonna fall under this, that they are a business unit, which means if they have 2 feed lines coming into their business, they shut one off, disconnect it, whatever, and they can tie in from their existing building and go into the next, much like Matt does. I just want to make sure that we're not going to bill them as 2 units, because that's how we're going to define it. So again, I
By
want
the
it crystal
definition of
clear by
Example
definition.
1,
Yes,
that's how I would understand it.
okay. They would cut their meter dead, pull their, whatever the original meter that's behind what Denise purchased, and if they want to tie in, that gives them the
Well, I don't
capability
even,
to feed.
I don't even know why they'd have to cut the meter.
Because they could potentially have two.
Yeah, because we don't want usage coming through that meter that's not being billed.
Well, you couldn't bill for both.
Well. But then we're creating more work, so then it really is at that point another unit.
Yes. Because it's
If,
at that meter. I get my point, go to the meter. I have to be on the meter, is
Okay, so then you pull the meter and reroute the.
correct,
The feed
and
line.
that feed line through each bill.
And that way it's the consistency, meter.
Yes.
Meter.
and just, it's allowed in R2 with some conditions, not R1.
And, okay, so to your point, if they so choose to not. Then they can
Pay for two.
pay for 2 meters and pay for 2 services.
Correct.
I have no problems with that.
And then whatever happens in the future, if another business, if they were to split, then the other business would, each would have its own meter.
That's correct.
Yeah, they would technically, if they sold that building, they would have to
Yes.
break that back off and break that connection and provide their own, replace that meter.
Yeah.
And be fed off one.
There's some potentially messy situations, but I think if we apply this consistently, we can work through them fairly easily.
And it makes sense for separate services. Even if you own a residential property and you build like a mother-in-law suite accessory structure behind you, it would make sense to have that separate if you have not only just usage or billing, but what if there's a break back there? If you're tied together, now you have to shut your main house off and that mother-in-law suite instead of just the mother-in-law suite, or vice versa. So I mean, there's a lot of reasons that separate services would make sense moving forward, but it would be costly, especially for, again, Matt Kester. And that's a unique situation, but the way those are all connected, it would be kind of a pain in the butt.
From your perspective, as an administrator, you're liking the example one.
Yes, I do. I think it's the most clear and straightforward and makes the most sense for enforcement or understanding on our side.
Were you gonna say something earlier, Barb? Or was that what you're gonna talk
I
about?
did. I got it.
I saw you.
Well, that defines that then. Anything else?
The last thing that I did include in the packet, and it's just right in the agenda, is that outside village rates. On that extra paper again that I provided. I have on the left side, it lists street name and number. Sorry, it's listed kind of weird, the way I pulled the report. That these are the outside users right now that are billed outside rate, and then I did just a little summary below. With the usage, we did a 12-month, so this may fluctuate a little bit, but what the current rate, what you're looking at a month, if you changed it to the inside rate, what the revenue would be. And then I did the difference for you just to show that there would be, if we decided to just go to an inside rate or do something, it would reduce that a little bit by that much. And then I just put some key points on the agenda that I actually found. I should send it to you guys. I found a really good article about this. I'll forward it to you all. And I pulled a lot of that information right from there.
What got me interested in this, I guess, is when we were talking with Brian and we talked about people on Silverhorn, so literally this doesn't include a lot. These are all from our water lines, our own village water system, literally on the edge of town that probably should be annexed or could be annexed. And we should provide them with that opportunity if they don't want to pay that. But also on top of that, I mean, a couple of you guys have sat on here for a few years. I think we've talked about one where out by Blissfield Baptist Church where they wanted to throw a private line in back past and expand out. Dan and Ashley Bailey, I think, did recently.
You're the most recent ones.
Yeah, so again, that wasn't done on the village's dime with them. So none of these that I've been on council, like Beamer Road, we haven't done anything on a Beamer Road to expand out in that district in the 20 years that I've been on council. So those water lines have been there for an incredibly long time. And whenever they were paid to be put in, I would assume that if they're being double billed, they've paid for that infrastructure improvement for over 7 houses. I mean, it had to been what, maybe a 3 or 4 inch line for a quarter of a mile. If we charge those residents 2 times what we charge our inside town residents, they've more than paid for that infrastructure improvement. So again, I just want to be fair across the board. Now talking about, we've heard Tammy out there, right, and Frucci and those guys out on Silverhorn. I'm assuming they're probably getting double billed by Riga, is that correct?
So we bill Riga the inside village rate, and they get one bill for their households. They then bill their individual households, and so they pay us with one check and then they collect their fees. So I don't know what Riga's fees are, but I do believe, it's my understanding that they charge their residential users a little bit higher to cover their costs.
Right, but I believe.
But we actually bill them the same rate as our residents.
Because they pay for their type of water lines, but as well.
Say that again, you gotta speak up, Brandon, louder and slower.
So like I paid, but they have their own water lines, but as well,
Right.
they have to take that, so that's where that difference comes from. Well, I was told that the village of Blissfield paid for those water lines that went to the outside the village limits people. That the city, we paid for those water lines, they didn't. So that's one of the reasons why they paid a higher rate. Because we had to take our money to put that water line in.
Right, in 2005 or 6 or whatever, when we built that loop with Riga, that was the secondary loop. So we feed up out to L&W. That's the main loop, and then we did a backup loop going down Silverhorn and up Wagner, whatever, to reach Riga. So that's where we talk about shutting off the different services with the county. We force those people because we put those lines in and it bypassed their residents. They had to, I remember Miss Dunbar back in the day. There were a lot of these residences that were angry because they had to pay for the tie-in fees. They didn't get a choice in the matter. They ran that line past them to get to Riga, and they were forced to tap into that water line.
So
used to
I
have
think
water.
those are billed through Riga though, because we don't bill them.
Right, but I guess, why are we letting, again. I'm assuming Riga, again, has to have a maintenance schedule to pay for their entire infrastructure system. So why, are the residents in Riga Village paying one rate and these houses going down? Same thing.
Riga doesn't pay one rate, Riga pays one bill.
I understand that, but Riga
So there's a $125 minimum spend on Riga. So there's a $125.
But I don't think that's what he's asking, Brandon. He's asking, is Riga billing their, like, in village, in town customers one rate and Silverhorn residents a higher rate? And I don't know what Riga's fee structure is.
Guarantee to that, and that's, so again, that infrastructure has to have been paid for. And Riga has to set
But
their
we
maintenance.
can't set their Riga's fees, like we have no, and this came up when we looked at their fees last year. And I remember even talking to council about this because we talked about this specifically came up with their bulk water and if we could set their fees. And we do not have the authority to dictate to Riga any of their fees. They have to establish those based on their actual costs.
So if I was those residents, I would argue that, but again, these residents here, these improvements haven't been done for more than 20 years. So why are they continuously being billed double? I mean, I guess they have the opportunity to annex in.
They sure do.
Yeah, that
But
would be
also-
to entice them, but it will, when we go to replace that line now, it will cost us additional funds.
Which is spread across the entire village.
Because we're
Not just
gonna
us.
pay a higher rate for those water lines because those are not, that's not our streets that we're tearing up. So we're now gonna have to work with the township because we don't have the authority. We can only work within our utility right away. So now we go replace that main and we replace above it, the township's gonna be like, well, what about the rest of the road? So we have to partner with them there, so there is some added cost to doing work outside of your village limits that you wouldn't normally have.
Double what we charge on it, it's, again, trying to, when these people are paying $250 water bills, that a month, that I get that, that's a struggle, that's a challenge. And, are they getting the bang for the buck? I'm not sure they are.
They do have options.
And I don't know. My question would be, and this was just before my time, so I just don't know. Was it always, did we always have inside outside rates, and was it always double, or was that something that came out of the rate analysis when Michigan Rural Water initially did that? Because I do agree with you 100% that we should only be charging a rate that would just that we like, what does it cost us to take care of that and replace it? And that's the rate we should charge. The fund is not meant to charge to make money or to save a bunch of money. It's supposed to pay for what it needs to, and that's it. And I don't know.
I believe it was long before the.
I've carried forward, like when I do the rate analysis, now that's built in and it tells me what our total fees, and I just adjust those accordingly. I don't know how the village ever got to it being double. There are communities that were no communities that I could find that it's not higher, but it's anywhere from a third higher, 1.5 to 2 is the most, to double is the most common.
And I've also seen a lot of legal challenges that are coming down the pipe throughout not only our state, but others on the fairness of that. And I guess I haven't researched enough to see what the outcomes are.
Well, and I
but
did
people
put
are
some
challenged these
considerations in there, so there has been some challenge from township residents because they don't get a vote. They have no say in what those fees are, so they can come here and talk, but it's not like if you live in the village of Blissfield, they get to vote for you guys, they get to have a little bit more of a voice. And then it goes back to I think it's the Headley amendment that says you can only charge what the fee is to cover your expenses and costs. So then how do we justify that? And I can tell you, I don't know. We've not done a project in so long that I don't know what that fee is. I don't know how we got to the double. So I could see if you guys wanted me to work with somebody to look at that to see, does it need to be double? But I absolutely think it needs to be higher than our village residents. But maybe it is 1.5 times instead of double.
And maybe
Maybe it's not, I don't know.
maybe it does depend on the year it was done, the time frame, Mike, that you're referring to, I don't know.
Well, I think it would depend on distance too. Are they
Distance,
literally across the
Right.
village boundary line, or are they 5 miles
Yeah,
out?
did we run a 5/8 straight out to their house, or we've literally done, hydrants and, up
Yeah.
main.
But you're stating also, Danielle, with your information that you gathered, is that the 2-time multiplier is. It's common, it doesn't make it right necessarily, but it is common, is what you're saying.
Yes.
So it's not like we're being uncommon, and we are being fair. I mean, you're stating here, we are not violating Michigan law.
Yeah, I don't think that at all. I'm just saying if you want, we could take a deeper dive and say, okay, this is what the true cost would be. I anticipate we're probably not far off at all. But I mean, that would be, because again, these were established before me, so I don't know how did they get to that point. And I mean, with the cost of infrastructure now, I can't imagine it's decreased.
Then maybe. From here on out, we don't expand unless you're part of the village
I
itself.
think that's what we determined after
don't-
Bailey's. I'm 99.9% sure, because we said Bailey's will be the last house that we will do that for.
And a lot of communities are also doing that too. They're putting moratoriums and they're saying, we're not providing you water.
Can you check on that,
Unless we
Danielle, if
annex
you
it.
would, on Bailey's, on paperwork for Bailey's or the. I
I don't know why we would, somebody wants to pay double the rate,
right, I'm just saying,
not aboard,
I
I'll
was
sell
just
you
saying,
water,
but
you got plenty,
because
not
it,
starving for any,
well, it became a. I don't know, it just,
plenty contention.
it can. And if it's very cut and dry, no, if we want the water, We're gonna go ahead and be part of the village.
Yeah.
Because the money for the taxes. I think that's. I remember there being some verbiage with that, don't you, Mike? I know there was with Bailey thing.
Yeah, we discussed it.
Yeah, I can look that up. and
If
I'll
you
send
forgot,
it to
it's
my-
gonna be-
But keep in mind, like with the Baileys, they only have water.
all of our outside users are water only.
Okay.
Mhm, right.
When we pulled the report, because I was looking at it, trying to figure out. the
We're gonna
base
annex them
variable.
in, there's gonna be some cost to get them hooked up to the sewer, so. It may not behoove us to force that issue. But then,
I know there was verbiage, but I can't
but
recall what.
and keep in mind that both the water and sewer are enterprise funds, so we're taking into account the cost. Of current and future costs to supply water, so. I'm not quite sure why we. I don't know, I guess I'd have to see the arguments for the moratorium and the arguments to annex them in as well.
I understand, and maybe that's something that we should be discussing since we're discussing all this now.
Yeah.
To revisit it. I don't know.
And it doesn't even have to be a moratorium. I mean, I know I said that and other communities do that, but you can just say, we don't have the funds to expand. So if you don't have access to a main already, you're not tying in.
Let's
Or we don't have the capacity to take on additional footage of water or sewer main. So again, if you don't have the main in front of you, we can't take that added cost on.
So in the Bailey's example,
I mean, they probably.
it was all on private land because the main went right by their house.
Yeah, so it probably made sense to tie them in if somebody, and I'm not super familiar with these properties, but we have a couple on Beamer. Let's say there's a vacant piece of property between and the main runs in front of them, like, who cares if they tie on, the main's there. It's not added infrastructure for us. Where I would see it being a concern is if we're extending our current infrastructure, because we need to take care of what we have and don't really have that capacity or the manpower to expand past that.
Well, by looking at it, so we can have that dialogue and see what we want to do with it.
One of those on Beamer is directly across from the water plant.
Well, I know where Beamer is, I'm just saying, I don't know if there's vacant properties.
There's not, there's like two houses past the school driveway,
Yeah,
and then after that, there's a third house, which is right next to the
Yeah,
second
field
house.
in between though. There's a field in between. That's-
There's a barn that
yeah, I know, I just drove by it Saturday, I think I remember,
The
but.
one house that's listed on there was strict.
And then I got three others, not to drag it out, okay, since we're talking rates, again, it's trying to. Again, be fairness, you know, get people to understand why we charge what we charge. The 4-inch lines. I can think too right now, BMC, Blissfield Manufacturing and Great Plains. Which neither of them are quote utilizing that water, right? Are they paying for their 4-inch line that goes to their buildings currently?
The availability fee, yes,
Each business, even if neither one's operating and they're still paying that, could they pull those lines? Could they pull those meters and say, we don't want to
yes,
pay that?
they could.
Again, that's quite a chunk of money there too, that we need to think, you know. Is it fair? But you know, again, it definitely does help supplement the system.
Well, if either of those pull their lines, it's definitely gonna be an adjustment. In the next budgeting cycle.
Mhm. Thank you.
It's definitely a rate increase, it's just the way it is.
The school, again, I think so we still need to revisit that. We're doing the irrigation system. And then probably get beat up here by some of my friends, but the fire departments. You know, if there's a fire out there, mainly Riga or Deerfield, something like that, if they come in and fill in our system. These other townships are benefiting from our system, they're filling at our hydrants. Are we filling them, or, you know, again, Palmyra has a fire on Palmyra Township, say out by Driggs in 223. Okay, where are they coming? They're coming to Blissfield to fill, right?
No, I don't know that.
That's on Blissfield. Residents dying, which is pumping, you know, again, is it a gentleman's agreement? It's something that happens everywhere. I don't know, but again, that does fall back, even when we're out practicing, we can go through a couple thousand gallons a night practicing. So are they continuously filling on our system and not reimbursing the village? So again, not to pin entities or municipalities against each other, but again. We are trying to do what's most respectable, most responsible for our residents, and to put that, again, anything above and beyond what we're already paying. You know, we all know what our rates have jumped. I think we just need to be fair across the board, say we need to protect our residents. So, but it's just how.
Well, I had honestly had no idea these were even two issues, so.
And keep
Definitely
in
not.
mind, your RIGA agreement says that if there's a fire in RIGA and they have fire suppression, that we will not charge them that usage.
Okay, but
So
that's
that's
not
in
up
your-
mine, or dear.
Or, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
yes, yeah. But
But the best place to fill when there's a fire out on Wellsville or something like that, we're coming into Riverbend, we're coming into Westbrook, we're coming into that area because. That's where we're filled. I mean, that's our first closest hydrant and. You know,
So you're even talking Blissfield Township.
exactly.
Right here, back into the scene of there.
I just want to bring up something, you mentioned the school irrigation, and you want to be this big. Actually, they should contract with schools for so many years, I don't remember, is it 50 years?
yeah, I did pull that. I'll look at that again and I'll talk to Dave, Mike, and I'll get all of you guys the more information. It was a 50-year agreement. I have mentioned a few times to Mr. Riley, I'm not really sure how. We kind of got the short straw on that whole thing. How we even came to that agreement, but they can get up to
A lot.
6 million gallons every 3 years of free water.
And
Is
the
what the contract
agreement is
says.
in place because of the amendments to use the land.
Right, so the trade-off was that we could build our tennis courts on their property, and then we would maintain the tennis courts and we would give them free water.
Oh, that was a great deal.
Well, that's where we need to look back and see.
And there's no termination
That is
clause in the agreement. So because I did look at this before, and the attorney said that both parties would have to agree to amend or terminate, because there's no termination.
They're not gonna
clause.
want to terminate that, it'd be silly.
Correct.
Well,
We got the-
and,
we
you
got
know,
the-
and that's where we're talking
we got
about the
the
tennis courts.
tennis
I don't want to, yeah, again, those tennis courts need to be replaced. They need to be done down to the base. So when we, if that were ever say, I would say, let's get the tennis courts out of that property because.
Yeah.
What it's gonna cost us to redo those down to the base. The lights aren't working properly. I mean, maybe we readdress it then, but. But I also want to say, if we're doing something not kosher by providing. free
You
water,
are
we can't.
definitely
That's an issue.
violating
So-
your ordinance.
So that's something we need to somehow address.
All right. Future date.
I should probably let you know that there was an agreement, I didn't know if you remember that.
What's that?
I should probably let you know that there was an agreement, I didn't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I don't remember. It's been a long time ago.
I don't know how we found it, it just happened.
Well, no, Lisa helped me find it, so she,
Okay, I don't know what brought it up, that we've been looking for.
I feel like Mike said something, and I was like, all right, I gotta find this thing, and so I do remember looking at it, but. I'll go back to that, I saved a copy of it, so I can send that to you, and I'll get you guys more info.
I think it's, Mike, I think it needs to be addressed. This is exactly what we're talking about, is the
Just
water.
try to clean stuff up.
That, let's clean it up while we have the opportunity.
Yeah.
No, I think that's looking ahead.
And in definitions in our ordinances, man, our ordinance is just vague, like everybody else has, you know, kind of crystal clear defined what words mean what, you know what I mean? So there's not that sort of vagueness of what we're actually trying to accomplish. So it is gonna be a long process. I absolutely want planning commission to have their meetings to talk about a lot of this stuff because again, they don't have a lot on their plate. I want them to meet. I want them to try to help us get this stuff in order. Again, you know, talking RRC, we're talking future planning, we're talking a lot of this stuff. We should be ready for it when it comes down to like.
All right, Eric, anything further? I'm good. Tim? No. Glenn?
Well, thank you.
No, we're here. Okay. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.